Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. As always, like I say in all my videos, if you do not like what I say, how I say it, or why I say it, then please do feel free to click off this video and go about the rest of your day in peace. And so today I'm going to be giving a honest review of the Ohuhu. Is that how it's pronounced? I'm honestly not sure. I feel like there's like a lot of discourse over the internet about how to pronounce it. But these are the Pastel Ohuhu marker set. I actually got these as a Christmas present. So let me go ahead and put it out there that obviously I'm not sponsored by this marker brand at all to give a review. So it's going to be my honest review. And I've been curious about these because obviously I've heard a lot of hype over the internet in the artist community about these markers and wanted to compare them because, as we all know, or maybe some of you do not know, I'm definitely a hardcore Copic girl. I've tried out and played around with Prismacolors. I've played around with some of the other ones. I'm trying to think of what the other marker brand is referred to as. What is it? I'm trying to remember. The Pro markers from Winsor & Newton. I've played around a little bit with those, but I always go back to Copic because they are my favorite. Yes, they are expensive, but there are places online that you can find a better deal on a Copic. And sometimes Copics can be a little bit temperamental. It just depends. My biggest recommendation, if you're going to have Copics, use them often. So, of course, when another marker brand comes out of the woodwork claiming to, be a competitor with it, I'm going to want to test it out because, again, one of my biggest things with Copic is even though they are expensive, they are completely refillable. You can change out the nibs and stuff. Off the top of my head, I cannot recall if the Ohuhu markers are indeed refillable. I'm pretty sure you can change the nibs on them. But again, off the top of my head, I cannot remember for sure. Yes, they do have a reversible brush tip that you can change around. The other thing, just sort of getting all my thoughts out here on these and the experience of using them for this first time, they definitely have a much different feel in your hand than when you use a Copic, because in comparison, the Copic definitely does seem a little bit more slim. It's more of an oval shape, while these are clearly round. So there was a little bit of getting used to the feel of them in my hand when I was using them, because they just felt like a thicker marker and almost a little bit more like slippery. So I had to be careful to not kind of lose my grip on them when I was using them. As far as when I swatched out the colors, how well do they match their, like, the colors that come out as the ink versus on the tip of the actual, marker itself. I'm not super thrilled with it because I feel like it is a little bit inaccurate. And it was kind of interesting because I noticed that one of the markers that I grabbed kind of early on the beginning of this video, when I was just kind of playing around with stuff, was actually called Tea Rose, and Copic has a very similar named color. So I kind of swatched the two just to see what the difference was between them. And there is a little bit of a difference in the color of the pigment and the ink when it comes out. But overall, it is a close comparison, like the colors. So if for some reason maybe you were using a Copic or maybe you were using this Ohuhu marker, you could easily probably use the other to continue on and replace it. A big bonus that I will give to the Ohuhu marker that I did enjoy was definitely using the brush tip. When it comes to the chisel tip, because that's how these markers are laid out, they have a broad tip, aka a chisel tip, and then a brush nib on the other end. even with the Copics, I don't use the chisel nib, like, ever. I don't it's not for me, it's not what I prefer. I like very much my brush nibs. And that's a big downside to other marker types that I've used. If it's a marker type that doesn't have a brush nib and it has some other type of nib, I'm usually not a huge fan of it. Just because I personally, with my own work, I like having that brush and the way that the brush feels. And I really liked how the brushes on these nibs felt. They felt very smooth. They had a really nice, tight kind of point on them. So I definitely enjoyed that while using them. To talk a little bit, because this is almost going to be like a double review, the sketchbook that I'm using here in this video is the Crescent Render sketchbook. And what's special about this particular sketchbook is that it is a sketchbook specifically for, and again, I'm not sponsored by this company to say anything about their product. I just was curious because I saw another artist using it. I was like, okay, I want to see if this sketchbook is all that it says it is, because it advertises as completely non-bleed. So if you're using markers, it will not bleed onto the other side of the paper. So you could use both sides of the paper to make a marker illustration, essentially. So I had sketched Star Butterfly a while back when I finished watching the whole entire series. As the first page in this particular sketchbook, so I figured I might as well use this pastel set of Ohuhu markers to color her, because obviously the pastel colors work for her in more than one way. So it was interesting to finally kind of like do a more tight finished kind of illustration in this sketchbook using these markers. As far as how they worked on the paper and how the sketchbook performed, it did not bleed at all. The only weird thing I would say that happened was right towards the end of this video with these markers, when I used and I introduced as like a final little touches to the sketch, was my Jelly Roll metallic pens. And one of them that I have here that you'll see is it's like a pink with a gold sheen underneath. The weirdest thing happened when I used it on the paper, which was that it didn't stay pink. It actually seemed to absorb whatever the pink dye was in the Jelly Roll, and then more so just kind of left the gold sheen. So that was kind of interesting, and I noticed it was only with this particular pen that occurred with. Otherwise, they worked perfectly fine on this sketchbook. Now, going back to discussing the markers and this particular set, because again, this is the pastel set of 48 colors, and including, of course, the colorless blender, which again, this is another thing that a lot of marker brands come with, is a colorless blender. I have the colorless blender for Copics, and of course, they give you this particular, their brand of the colors blender already inside this 48 set. And I'm not a huge fan of colorless blenders, honestly. I mainly use the colorless blender just as an experiment to say I used it on the collar of her dress. And it worked to a certain degree. I just am not a huge fan of colorless blenders. They're not my favorite thing. I prefer, if I'm going to blend, I'd rather blend using the various colors, which I more so kind of tested that idea on her hair, which I really do like the hair. I think the yellow colors that I used, which were the lemon chiffon color, which is Y030, the buttercup yellow, which was a Y 120, and then I also used a little bit of the YR 240, which was cream, which again is more of this kind of orangey color in her hair. And again, part of how I think the blending worked in this case using these markers, I need to try using these markers on a different paper to see how well they blend, because obviously the sketchbook is designed for markers, so it blended pretty well. And because this is a non-bleed sketchbook, the colors obviously stay wet, I feel like, longer than they would in other cases, so it worked to blend, and I think the colors are pretty nice. Now, as far as how many of the colors that I used from this set, and I'm trying to, while I'm recording this, again, I'm just kind of going with it. This set on, I'm trying to find it, on Amazon ranges from, like, I'm seeing it for $39.99 to some are listing it as $29.99. And for how many markers you get, obviously, that's quite a deal, which again is part of why so many people have hype around this marker set. And yeah, I'd say if you're looking for a cheaper alternative to Copics, these do work very well. Have a lot of the pastel colors that come in, the Copic brand. And when I tested out that tea rose color, they are very comparable. They are slightly different colored. One is, I feel like the Ohuhu came out a little bit more pink, while the Copic is has a little bit more yellow in it. So it just depends. But if you are on a budget and you want something to give you the effect of a Copic marker, then I think these work very well for that. But I only used probably, and again, I tried to use as many of the colors as possible on this sketch. I used probably half of them. There is another half of the colors, which are more of those in this pastel set, more of the muted colors, more of the kind of the earth tones that I did not use. If you guys are interested in seeing me use those colors, maybe in a different illustration, definitely do let me know and I'll give that a go. But, as far as, obviously, because it is a pastel set, there are a little bit of limitations about how far you can push them and layer them a little bit to get darker gradients, because it's just the nature of the colors themselves. The one thing I personally did find maybe a little bit annoying was that they could only fit so many colors into this set. There isn't, to me, feel like as many options as I would like normally when it comes to creating skin tone, which is why I left the white of the paper to kind of represent the rest of Star Butterfly's skin, because she's not exactly dark skinned or, has a lot of pigment to her skin. She is very on the paler side. So that was a little bit of an interesting thing to try to test out. The other thing I did notice was, and again, this might be due more to the paper itself, but I feel like when you put down a color on this paper in this sketchbook, you need to be prepared. It's almost like kind of dealing with watercolor, where when you layer down watercolor, you have to expect that it will dry a little bit lighter than the color that you initially put down wet. And there was almost kind of an effect like that with these markers. And again, I don't know if that's necessarily a trait of the marker itself, or if that's more of just a interaction between this paper in the sketchbook and the marker, where I was glad I was working lighter to darker in a sense, because when I put down certain colors, they kind of, as in their wet state, kind of looked a little bit different, but then dried appropriately in that way. So again, this was just my first go around using these particular markers to see what they were all about. I need to play with them more. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how this marker sketch came out. It's been a while since I've actually used markers, because I've been more so in my work focusing with watercolor and gouache. So yeah, I definitely have this very interesting sketchbook that I need to fill up. So if you guys have any suggestion for other characters or other marker kind of testing suggestions, definitely do let me know in the comments. And if there's a particular fan art or character that you think I should draw next, also let me know that. The other thing, kind of just going back to reviewing the sketchbook, I know this is a criticism of the sketchbook that I saw online, and I don't disagree with it, because even I find it a tad annoying. And that's just that it is a bound hardcover kind of sketchbook, so it doesn't lay the easiest. So you might have seen me kind of, especially at the beginning when I was trying to get used to it, and especially because it is literally the first page in the sketchbook that I was coloring on, kind of needing to readjust and kind of hold the paper a little bit more taut so it wouldn't move around while I was trying to color. But if I were to give these markers kind of a final rating, I don't know, out of 10, maybe I would give them like a 6 out of 10. While Copics, I would rate maybe more like a 9.5 out of 10, because again, I am a huge fan of Copic. I've only had sort of minor issues with Copics, which I can get into in a different video if you guys would like. I will also be posting the full length video file of this sketch over on my Patreon. So if you guys want to sit and watch a longer form, like the uncut, unsped up version of this drawing process, that will be available over on my Patreon for all patrons. So definitely head over there if you want to show your support. Also head over to my other links, such as Twitter, because that's actually where this idea for this particular video came from, was over on my Twitter. That is what my Twitter followers voted for. I'm putting up polls. I'm definitely a lot more active over on Twitter than I am on Instagram lately. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.